Welcome, everyone. My name is Julie Noble, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston. I am the Vice President of the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions. And if this is your first session, welcome to the NYSAC Conference on the Environment 2022. This is the session where we will be discussing grants and Grants Gateway. And we have two fantastic presenters with us today that I will welcome in just a moment. We also have our technician, John Rhodes, and if you have any questions for John, you can type something into the chat or raise your hand, and John will help to answer those. We're going to take questions and answers in the chat throughout the panel today, so you're welcome to type those in there. I have everyone, besides our panelists, muted and off video, and I ask that you remain that way throughout the panel today. Certainly there is time throughout the conference for lots of networking. So after our session today, I invite you to go back into GatherTown, and I'll show you how to do that after our Zoom call. You'll enter back into GatherTown and you can sit at a table, walk through the lounge, look through the exhibition room, check out any of the exhibitors or the sponsors and chat with folks throughout the day. And the GatherTown will be open until midnight tonight. You can hang out as long as you'd like. There's even a bar in there, but it's bring your own. So we're going to get started with our first panel today. And so our first panelist, Kristen, you can go ahead and start to share your screen while I introduce you. Kristen is the Grants Management Operations and Implementation Lead for the New York State Division of Budget and has worked in the grants field since she began working for New York in 2009. She has worked with the grants management team since its inception in 2013 and has helped design and implement Grants Gateway, as well as assisted with rolling out the policies involved in the original grants reform effort. She currently leads the implementation, operations, and vendor support teams.
You in the meeting room in GatherTown, you want to be in the Grants Gateway meeting, please click X on your screen and you'll be joined into the panel discussion. Please click X on your screen and you'll be joined into panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Just finishing up, Kristen currently leads the implementation, operations, and vendor support teams and continues to work on policy development. Prior to her state service, Kristen worked at a number of nonprofits providing financial development, program services, and training. I'm now going to turn it over to Kristen for her presentation.
Thanks, Julie. I just want to say thank you. I'm super excited to be here and talk to people about the Grants Gateway and the grants management effort in New York State. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm going to start right in and talk to you a little bit about the Grants Gateway as a whole and the grants management effort in New York State. So I'm going to go through this quick because I don't have a lot of time. I know I usually kind of spread this out a bit, so this will be quick, but there will be lots of resources at the end for you to contact us afterwards with any additional questions that we can't cover in the training and also or in the presentation. I also want to mention that this will be available, this presentation, afterwards, because there are a lot of links in it. So you'll be able to click on any of the links from the presentation afterwards. So don't worry about having to write them down or anything like that. So today we're going to talk about origins and objectives, kind of how we got here, why we ended up doing this grants management project in the state. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Grants Gateway is. We're going to talk about how you can find funding, which I know is always really important to people who are looking, to support their organizations. We're going to talk about how you access the Gateway through our registration process. We're going to talk a little bit about our shared accomplishments and what's coming up in the Gateway. And then probably the most important piece is our resources and training piece, because we have a really robust kind of training and help desk, which can assist you kind of in your application process when you have grants that you are applying for. So we'll get right into it. So this is probably not a surprise to any of you, but historically in New York State, our grants contracts have been approved late. In 2012, the governor decided that they were going to work on trying to address this issue, and grants reform was born. The main goal of this was to try and make sure that we could get our contracts with our vendors approved on time so that there would be no disruption of services, so that our grantees did not have to kind of float services to the state and not get paid timely. And basically so that everybody, people were able to get the services that they need. So why did this happen? There were a number of reasons. We had many grant making agencies who were using a whole mess of different types of systems, databases, processes to manage their grants. We had lots of different application processes, lots of different contract processes, and our vendors were confused. They didn't understand why things at Department of Health had to be different than things at Parks and Rec. Or Parks and Restoration. And that makes sense. We're one state, maybe it should be similar at different agencies. Agencies were using really outdated manual processes. One of the things that I always bring up here, I used to work at a state agency doing grants, and I used to walk around the building with 6 copies of very thick contracts like this, looking for somebody to sign it, which wasn't probably the best use of my time. So, those agency kind of specific processes didn't just hurt the state, it hurt the vendors as well. You guys had to go around doing the same thing, trying to find people to do wet signatures, get notarized, do all of the things on contracts that took some time. Additionally, our contract documents were kind of all over the place. You had different contracts with different state agencies. You didn't have one uniform contract that you could look at and know the standard terms and conditions were always going to be the same. Your budgets were going to look similar, even if they were different, amounts or different types of categories. The structure was going to be the same. So those are some causes. The effects, you guys know this, high administrative costs. We didn't have any big picture reporting of what the grants look like. You guys could not work with us as a whole. You were working in individual silos. Our grantees had to use lots of different systems. So our solution was to, implement one single system, one main grants management system, which is the Grants Gateway. We wanted to eliminate those outdated paper processes and lots of layers of review to try and streamline the process. We implemented a program called pre-qualification. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. That's something I would suggest perhaps going to one of our webinars that I'll talk about at the end. I think that we have a lot of government people in the audience, and governments are not required to pre-qualify. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on that today. But if you are a nonprofit, definitely attend one of our webinars on that. And we wanted to standardize the application and contract, which we have worked on as well. So the Grants Gateway, it's going to be quick. One side, we have the state, we have the grants reform team, which has since turned into grants management because we have done the reform, now we're managing it. Our control agencies, OSC, the Attorney General, state agencies. On the other side, we have our vendors, we have our governments, our not-for-profits, other contractors. And we have the system functions. These are the things that the grants management system, the Grants Gateway, does. And these are basically the grant life cycle. You're going to apply for a grant. You're going to do the pre-qual. You're going to do bid submission, which is your application submission. We are going to, as a state, review applications in the system. If you're so lucky to get a contract from an award, we do the contract development online. We execute those contracts online. Instead of walking around the building, getting signatures, we now push a button and we can sign these contracts electronically, both the vendors and the state and the Office of the State Comptroller and the Attorney General. So it all goes electronically. You can report on your progress of your grants online, and you can do claims management online as well. So it's a soup to nuts grants life cycle. Whole thing happens in an electronic system. So this is probably the most interest to you. I know that with the Bond Act, if it passes, there might be potentially more funding for people. And I know that that's important to everybody. So how do you access it? How do you know that it's out there, right? We have something called the Grant Opportunity Portal, and that's part of the Grants Gateway. So this is basically the front end. This is public. All state agencies are required to post their opportunities here. And potential applicants can come in, they can browse, they can search, and they can view these opportunities freely. You don't have to sign up or log in or do anything. This is just a free page. You can come here, click on browse, click on search, and just look. You could search by a keyword. You could search by a state agency. There's lots of different ways you can search. And when you find an opportunity that you like, you can look at it and it'll have a description of what that opportunity is. It will talk about any questions and answer period. It'll talk about amounts that might be available. It'll basically give you all the information you need to decide if you want to apply for that grant. If you like this, you can go ahead and sign up for notifications, and that takes an email address. And what will happen is you'll identify several areas of interest. And when a grant is posted and that grant has your area of interest, it will send you an email, the system, and you will get that email and you can then go look at the opportunity. So you don't have to keep checking in on the portal. You'll get notified when things are posted. We usually suggest people choose all the areas of interest because you never know what's going to pop up as a grant opportunity. And there really aren't that many. There's maybe like 10 to 20 a month. So it sounds like a lot, but it's just an email and you can take a quick peek and see if you like it. So if you get some things that you look interested in, you can register with the Grants Gateway. And I am going through this quickly. I apologize, but I have a short period of time. So to access the gateway, you need to register. There's a registration form on our website. And you fill that out along with an organizational diagram or an org chart. That org chart has to identify your head of your organization because the head of the organization is the person that's going to sign off on this form. The reason that that's important is because this form is going to identify your delegated administrator. Your delegated administrator is the person with the keys to the kingdom. That's the person who's going to enter your users for you. So that is the person that's going to be able to enter who's going to sign your contracts, who's going to go ahead and enter your payment requests. So you want to make sure it's somebody who either has the authority in your office or your organization to make those decisions, or the authority to follow the directions of whoever makes those decisions and that you trust will do so. You do need a New York State vendor ID. If you've ever done business with the state, gotten payments before, you already have one. So you can find that out and put it on the form. If you haven't, you will submit a substitute W-9 form and we'll get that for you. We ask you to give us like 5 to 10 days for registration processing. Turnaround time is typically shorter, but we do ask for a little bit of time because sometimes we have to go back and forth to get all the proper documentation. And then those delegated administrators receive their username and passwords via mail. This does need to be notarized and then you can email it in. And this is all for security. We want to make sure that the right people have access to your organization. We don't want random people getting, your organization access to it. So from there, you would apply for those grants that you're interested in. I don't have time to go into that, but I will tell you that it's very important if you are going to apply for a grant, you identify that you attend our webinars about application, you attend any webinar that is put on by the state agency that's offering the grant. Sometimes we do joint webinars with them that talk about the grant itself, as well as the technical aspects, and that's really important. So, tell you a little bit about that, but on top of that, I'll tell you just what we've done over the past 10 years. We've done a lot of grants. 25 state agencies are doing a lot of grant business, tons of RFPs, 20,000 contracts. I think it's $20 billion have gone through the system. So there's been, a lot of activity. I'll also tell you our grants management activities are transitioning into the statewide financial system, which you're probably aware of that system. It's where all of our financial work gets done in the state. That will replace the gateway as the enterprise solution. It's going to have some great benefits. We're going to have paperless registration, updated interface. Things are going to be easier to use. My office will still be supporting the system. So it's going to be basically business as usual in terms of support and all of that, but that will be happening in the next year. I'm not going to go too far into it because right now we're still operating business as usual, but I did want to give you kind of a quick update on that. Most important slide is right here. Like I said, you'll have access to it. Registration assistance is here. We have a webinar page. We have videos. This is all the, links to different resources that we have on our webinar. We have user manuals. We have instructional videos. We have webinars live, many of them a week, all documentation. Most important here is our help desk, phone number, email. They are ready and willing to help you. We want to help you. Don't call at the last minute. It's very hard to help if you call at the last minute. Give yourself enough time when you are working on an application or any piece of the gateway. But if you call, we will help you and we will help you get through it. So I wanted to stay in my time. I think I was close. Thank you. And I will turn it back over to Julie.
Thanks so much, Kristen. That was fantastic. You covered a lot of information in a short period of time, and we really appreciate it. Now I'm going to introduce Susan. Susan Pepe is the grants coordinator at New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Hudson River Estuary Program, or HREP. In this role, Susan manages HREP's grant process, including developing the request for application, or RFA, coordinating the application review and award process, contract development, and grant reporting. Prior to her position with HREP, Susan worked as a contract grant specialist for the Research Foundation for SUNY and as a senior grant administrator for Rensselaer Polytech Institute. Susan holds an MA in social policy from Empire State College. Susan, you're all set and we can see your screen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. Now that you had a great introduction to the Grants Gateway by Kristen, thank you very much, Kristen. We're going to move into what reviewers look for in grant applications so you can hopefully get the most out of the hard work that you put into your submission. I know that that's a lot of work and you want it to be successful in the end. Okay, I'm going to be covering two main points today. First, I'm going to provide just a few tips that will serve as a good foundation for submitting grant applications in general. And then I'll move into some more specific things that reviewers look for in grant applications. Keep in mind that a lot of the information that I'm going to be presenting is more general in nature because grant opportunities can vary greatly. Okay, moving along here to the general tips. And Kristen sort of alluded to this a little bit in the Grants Gateway talk. Tip number one is to start as early as possible. It really helps to be informed of grant opportunities as soon as they're available. And the Grants Gateway does have a function that you can use to register for those funding announcements. State agencies also have newsletters that they publicize grant opportunities through. The DEC has DEC Delivers. And then we also announce grants through press releases and other official New York State publications, such as the Contract Reporter, the New York State Register, the Environmental News Bulletin, and even local news outlets often report on our grant opportunities as well. So there's a lot of streams of information out there. It just helps to be dialed into those so you're aware as soon as something is available. And then once something is available, you want to make sure that you read the solicitations thoroughly and be familiar with all the requirements in the RFA, including eligibility requirements, any key dates, what the project objectives and types are, allowable costs, and if there's any match commitment. This is also where you'll find detail about how the applications will be evaluated and scored. So then you'll have an idea of how the reviewers will rate the application, which I'll dive into a little deeper in just a few minutes here. But it is highly suggested to really get familiar with that request for application. We really try to make them as detailed as possible. Sometimes they're almost too detailed and they get really long, but all the information you need is in that document. We also post FAQ at the Grants Gateway, so it's highly recommended to check that to see what questions have already been asked if you are uncertain about something in the RFA. And of course, if something still is unclear, we always have contact information in the solicitation, so feel free to reach out to the person listed in that solicitation to get more information about the question that you have. Familiarize yourself with the application submission system, which in our case, of course, is the Grants Gateway. and any other technical requirements for submitting the application. You want to make sure that you understand the overall process, the system roles, and the required application components. And it's wise to get that application started in the system as soon as you can early. So you have adequate time to review the format and requirements, including the specific program questions that are part of the application. It's pretty common for people to start those late, and then they are scrambling at the last minute to try to figure out where all the components are. So you get ahead of the game if you're in there early. And then when it comes to the answering those program questions, you want to be direct and succinct in your answers. You want to get to the main points and don't add any unnecessary fluff. Reviewers have a lot of applications to review as a result of our opportunities, and they take a lot of time. So any efficiencies are really appreciated. It is recommended to ask for your supporting materials from any co-applicants, collaborators, and stakeholders as soon as possible. Your partners need time to process that request, and the sooner they know about it, the easier it'll be to get that information on time. You don't want to be stressing out about getting those support letters the day before the deadline. And if you follow up on that regularly, you want to make sure you get that timely so you can upload that to the application and get everything in before the deadline. Then once you feel the application is complete, you want to make sure that you double check that everything is included. We frequently include a checklist to make sure that applicants can kind of keep things on track. But that's not always the case. You might need to create one yourself to ensure that everything's been addressed. And then finally, it's strongly recommended to submit your application as early as possible. We do really suggest that you try to get that in no later than 2 business days before the deadline. Working those last few hours of the deadline is really risky, and anything can happen at the last minute with processing your application. And it may not be a result of a technical problem. It is very common for people to wait till the last day, and especially those last few hours, but I really recommend to try not to do that and get things done as early as possible. Okay, moving on to some more specific things that reviewers will be looking for in an application. These are a little bit more general. It will definitely vary depending on the solicitation that you're responding to, but these are some general things. First would be, is the project eligible? I mean, even if your organization is eligible, there are usually other eligibility requirements like location, subject, project type, maybe budget requirements. So you want to make sure that the project that you have in mind is eligible along with the requirements of the request for application. And then what is the benefit or impact of the project? You know, if we fund this project, what kind of impact or benefit will it have on the community, the state, the environment, the economy, the general public? The list goes on and on there. Is that impact significant or meaningful? And if so, how much? Projects that have a high impact or benefit are preferable. Will that project be successful? Based on the information provided in the application, the reviewers will form an opinion as to whether the project is likely to be carried out successfully. You want to make sure that project is realistic. You want to make sure that you reinforce how you plan to make that project succeed so the reviewers are at ease that the project will be successful. Is the work plan and timeline feasible? What deliverables are expected and what are the outcomes? You want to make sure that the project and its schedule are reasonable. Unrealistic deliverables or timelines are red flags to reviewers. Is the project building on prior work or perhaps setting the stage for future projects? Reviewers will look favorably on a project that's taking prior efforts to the next level, and also that demonstrates the project might open doors for future opportunities. Does the project engage the public? How does the public benefit from the project? Projects that engage and or inform the public are desirable. Public funds should be used to benefit the public and the quality of life in a community. Is the applicant committed to seeing the project through? Reviewers will gauge the level of commitment the applicant has to complete the project. Broad statements about this might be seen as wishy-washy, so you want to make sure that you're specific in your language that communicates a realistic commitment to the project. And then, is there adequate support in place for the project? And that can be from local government, citizens, other key stakeholders. Has the support been for the project been demonstrated in the application? Typically letters are provided by by stakeholders, and those are valuable to documenting commitment of their support. And reviewers take inventory of those letters and they use them to decide whether or not the support is excellent, if it's adequate, or maybe it's lacking. You want to make sure that you get all of the letters from relevant stakeholders to ensure that there isn't anything that can be assumed to be missing. A missing letter might assume that there's not support there from that key organization. So you want to make sure that you get all the letters that are necessary. And just a quick note on the quality of the supporting materials. We do typically see template type of letters where a template has been provided to stakeholders and they all follow that format, which is completely fine. It's great, but individual written letters do stand out. So if there's any chance you can get letters that are written individually from stakeholders, that would be recommended. And then, are there any permissions needed for the project? That could be whether it's the landowner, maybe permits are required. If those things are missing, they can be deal breakers to the project success. And if they're not addressed appropriately in the application, the reviewers may feel that the project will be unsuccessful. Okay, let's see, we have the next slide here. All right, does the project engage the funder? Should it or shouldn't it? Is it going to require agency and program staff time? The workload of the agency and program staff can be a consideration when reviewing these applications. And the solicitation may be more clear about what the level of involvement in project management the agency or funder may desire in a project. You want to consider that when you're applying. Does the applicant have skills and experience needed to complete the project? Are they engaging with consultants or other stakeholders that have experience? You want to make sure that you clearly communicate who the players are in the project and what their roles are on the project. And then we come down here to the budget, which is one of the most important pieces of the proposal. Is it reasonable and cost effective? And the key statement here is that project a good use of state funds? Are the costs proposed eligible or ineligible? Are there any erroneous costs? Does the budget look like it might be inflated? Is there documentation substantiating those costs provided? And even if not, does it look reasonable? We don't always require documentation for budgets, but it is recommended if you have something and submit it, it's more information for the reviewers to evaluate your application to make these decisions. And then match. Typically, a state grant does require match. And if it does, has this application met the requirement? Maybe it has exceeded the requirement. You know, it's sometimes people think that contributing a large match is a good thing, but it actually can backfire. It can look unrealistic to reviewers, and there could be concerns about the applicant meeting that match commitment if the grant is awarded. So you want to make sure that you're realistic with your match commitment and demonstrate that you have a financial stake in the project. That's really the goal when it comes to match, that the applicant has a financial stake in the project. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I hope you found the information helpful, and we'll be taking questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. That was really great. A great overview of exactly what Grants Gateway is all about. So thank you. So now I am going to take off my moderator hat and put on my presenter hat. For those of you who may have just joined a little bit, again, we're here at the Conference on the Environment. And I'm going to talk to you now for a few minutes about how this grants process works from a municipal perspective. So in addition to being today's moderator, I'm also the sustainability coordinator for the city of Kingston. And I am one of the things that I do quite often is grant writing and grant submission and grant management and grant reporting. And so I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to walk you all through what my process is like live with Grants Gateway, and give you some tips on what I have seen as a municipal employee and what that process is like. I put the link to Grants Gateway in the chat. When you get to the main page, you have to log in. So you will have set up a password. And log in through your municipality or through whatever organization you're with. and that will log you into the system. What you see, and I'm going to actually try to center this and make this a little bit easier. Just let's offset a little bit. Well, let's just keep it that way. So right here on the home page, it brings you up the available opportunities. So whatever is available at that time. It has an inbox, which gives me my messages, which I have one in there, and I'm aware of that because it was sent to my email. So I can check that off. I'm aware of it. I'm going to say that it's read. And I also know that I have a task coming up because that was sent to my email as well. And my task is that I have to sign off on a grant. And it looks like here, it says the current status is the contract signature is required. We've gone through many different contracts in the city of Kingston. We have had hundreds of grants through Grants Gateway, and I alone have applied for dozens and managed dozens of them. You can search through all of the grants that you have as a municipality by clicking on the contracts, and you can see here that the city of Kingston since 2015, 2016, and now has had dozens and dozens of contracts totaling millions of dollars. But what I'm going to actually do with you today is I'm going to show you how to get into one of these grants and how to actually start to apply for one. So there's a grant that I'm interested in applying for that is due at the end of October. I'm going to show you how to do that. Sometimes it takes a little while, but it's, just part of the system. So I go to view available opportunities, which is on the front main page, and it brings me up to all of the grants that are available right now. And that's things from municipal waste. And you can see it's divided by funding agency. So things that are within the DEC, Office of Parks and Recreation, Department of Labor, Department of Health, and it'll tell you what the status is that it's available, when it started to be available, who is eligible, and when it is due. Now, just to give you an idea of some of the grants that I've personally managed through this, again, dozens, but things like recycling education, recycling, getting money for packers and for totes. We put in a kayak dock with funding. We did a resiliency project, our natural resources inventory, our open space plan, electric vehicle charging stations, an organics plan, all these different things that have been run through this Grants Gateway. Particularly, the one that I'm interested in coming up is a Department of Environmental Conservation grant. And we have a grant that we do for using education, doing environmental education and recycling education through a grant. And so if I was interested in applying for this year, the DEC grant is the Municipal Waste Reduction and Recycling Program. You click on that and it tells you all about the grant, who the contact person is, what the minimum and maximum award would be, if there's a webinar about it, how long the content or how long the contract would be for, and you can click right here to start to apply. Now, applying for the grant isn't submitted until the person who is authorized in your municipality or in your location to submit. And I am not that person. I can write the grant up the wazoo, but I'm not the authorized party to submit it, which means there's checks and balances. Here's the information that you need to know as you're moving through a grant, in Grants Gateway. There's all different components that you need to fill out. What I really like about it is that there's a way on the whole entire process to find out if you forgot anything. There's a little button at the top here that says check global errors. And when you check on it, it tells you what you still need to complete. And in this case, I still need to complete the entire thing. I didn't even start yet. But you can always check there in that check global errors to see what you still need to do. Now, the forms menu is where it walks you through. You put in your addresses. It gives you the questions for the grant. Now, here's a trick. I never work in Grants Gateway. I always go into Grants Gateway when I'm exploring what grants I want to apply for, and I copy and paste these questions into a separate Word document. I don't work directly in Grants Gateway because a few things. One, if you don't do something in Grants Gateway for about 15 minutes, if you don't have a live action, it closes you out. And that's something that I don't want to have to keep logging back in. But also, I would be working on a grant for weeks and weeks before I actually submit it. So I get the questions, I work offline on those questions, and then I come back when I have them and I copy and paste the answers into here. Another trick to remember if you're using Grants Gateway is that there are limits on how much you can submit. And the limits are not based on word, they're based on character. So for instance, if it says 0 of 500 and I start typing something, once I get to 500, it will stop me. And so just remember that that is not 500 words, it's 500 characters. And so keep in mind as you are preparing that that's really important. There's a lot of times, so the question, if it has a red dot next to it, that means it's mandatory and you do need to submit it. Oftentimes you can submit and upload a file. It's not often required, but as far as I'm concerned, if they're suggesting that you upload a file, it's helpful to the reviewer because it's giving extra proof that it's something that you want, that they want to be able to see. Some of the questions are very simple. There may be a drop down yes, no, or not applicable. Others require more description. And depending on the grant will depend on how many questions there are. This particular one only has 22, and I say 22 isn't only because there are some that have far, far more than 22. Now that's the questions. You also navigate through the budget, and for the budget, you will put in your salary. You can put in fringe, which is, benefits, any contractual things that you need to put in, and other expenses, and it summarizes it all up into an expenditure summary. So when you put in your salary, so for instance, I recently applied for some additional electric vehicle grants through Grants Gateway. I put in my title, which is Environmental Sustainability Coordinator, my role, which is the project manager. How many of me are there? Just one. What's my salary? I put that whole thing in there. How many hours a week do I work? What percentage am I funded? That's how much of my time over the course of the 2-year project is going to be spent on electric vehicles. How many months am I funded? I'm funded for 12, or if it's 2 years, I fund for 24 months. And then I total the grant funds. Now in the case of certain projects, again, as Susan was mentioning, you need to put in a match. It's often the case that I will use staff time as match. So if I'm going to put in electric vehicle charging station, I'll use the time of our Department of Public Works heavy motor equipment operator who's doing the trenching as match time. Or I'll use my time on the project, since I'm fully funded by the city, I'll use my time as match time. Or maybe for instance, for our open space plan, I used Conservation Advisory Council members' time as match to provide technical assistance and input and support on our grants. And that match helped to meet the 15% that we needed for that particular grant. Once you put all of your budget in, now for the contractual and the other expenses, that's where you would put in something like, again, with like an EV or the kayak dock that we're putting in. That's all put in the cost for the design work, where I'll put in the cost for the purchasing of the kayak dock, where I would put in the cost of the installation. If I had to put up a sign, a lot of times the state requires you to put up an acknowledgement sign that says, this project was funded by DEC. And so I'll put that into the budget. The whole thing totals up here, and you can keep track of what your budget is. Back in the forms menu, it gives you your match worksheet also, which tells you, again, where your match is, what kind of match you're requiring. It asks you where your match is coming from. And that is something that needs to oftentimes constitute a specific amount of the project. Now, what's also something that is valuable to know about when you're submitting the project or submitting the grants is that there are often, there's a whole process that you need to put in through your, for the work plan. So sometimes the work plan is populated already and sometimes it is not. First, they ask you what the project period is. So for my EV charging stations, my project period is going to be January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024. A project summary goes into why we're doing electric vehicle charging stations, which ones we already have, where we want to put these, how it's beneficial to the community. And the organizational capacity talks about how we've done this before, how we're going to do it, that we're going to work with Department of Public Works and in my office and get this done. And we're going to collaborate with the county on it. But the actual work plan is very, very specific. So it walks you through the objectives. In this case, this is a recycling grant. So it tells us what the objectives are, that we need to employ a recycling coordinator, It walks you through the performance measures that you have to pay this recycling coordinator, maintain the payroll records. This is really helpful, and it wasn't always the case in Grants Gateway. We used to have to create our own work plan, but now it is already pre-populated for most projects, and it really helps you to understand what the work plan is. There are some of them that you can modify on your own, and then others that are not modifiable. But it helps you really think through and understand all the components of it and make sure that you are capturing all of the aspects of the grant, including from procurement to reporting. Ultimately, you walk through the entire process. Sometimes there are pre-submission uploads, so there might be a sexual harassment form that you need to submit, or Executive Order 16, which is stating that you're not doing any business with Russia. And then there's other forms, sometimes a worksheet that you need to submit in this section. Always check your global errors to see what you're missing. And then finally, when it's time, you change the status to I'm ready to submit. And then the person in your department or who has the authorization is the person that then submits the grant for you. I'm going to stop sharing. That was the world's fastest overview of how to use the Grants Gateway system inside the system. But I want to make sure now that I'm going to bring Kristen and Susan back on, if you guys would join back in. And I want to go out to the group here with any questions to any of the three of us, Kristen or Susan or myself, about grants, about Grants Gateway, about the process, about the reviewing, about access, any of that. If you would like to type questions into the chat, you're welcome to do so. If you would like to raise your hand, we will recognize you, and I can call on you and unmute you. That's fine either way. I see one question here that says, can a volunteer make an application for the town? That I'll speak to it from my perspective and what my understanding is. In our municipality, we have our comptroller and our mayor as the people who have the authorization to submit. I don't know what the title for that is. What's like the submission title, Susan? The people who have like the biggest authority.
The contract signatory?
Yes, contract signatory. They then set up people who are able to get into Grants Gateway and like fill in all the stuff that I just showed you. What are those people called?
Delegated administrator. Grantee is the one who can just fill it out but not submit.
Okay, so the grantee. So yep. I've been made a grantee, and my colleagues are made grantees. I would think that a volunteer could do it if they had access to it, if they were granted access by their signatory. I don't know, Susan or Kristen, do you have any reason to think that that wouldn't be able to be the case?
It would be a town decision. I mean, yeah, physically, there's no reason in the gateway why the delegated administrator for the town couldn't set up anyone they wanted to as a user, and they could set it up as any type of user. But it would really be a town decision as to whether they want to do that as an internal control thing. I will say that there's a start and end date on user roles, so they could say, you know, this volunteer only has access to do this from December 1st to December 5th, so that it's a very short period of time where they have access to the system. The other option is what you suggested earlier, which is what you do it offline and then potentially give it to you to type in and submit. You know, there's always
absolutely. That's a great suggestion. And I've actually done that before, where I will work offline and I will come up with all the answers, but I will give it to a colleague to actually just literally do the copying and pasting into the system. Right. So yeah, that's a great suggestion, is that, you know, anyone can produce all the answers. Right. But then one of the grantees has to actually be the physical person to put it into the system. If there's other questions, go ahead and raise your hand or put them into the chat. Kristen and Susan, meanwhile, I don't know if there's anything that I said that made you cringe or was wrong, or you want to correct me.
There was something that I wanted to clarify, but it wasn't a cringe and it wasn't wrong.
Okay.
Can't remember what it was though. So it couldn't have been too bad.
I thought you did a great job.
You did
with your tips. Yeah.
I was thinking we wanted you to work for us because you did a very good job.
Oh, things don't work out here in Kingston. I always assume I'm going to work for the state anyway. So, but yeah, I mean, Grants Gateway is it feels very daunting in the beginning if you haven't done it, but it's really actually, if you are a methodical thinker, it's very methodical. And
It is.
as a grantee, there's not really a lot of room for error because it doesn't let you put in more words than you can. There's always the check errors thing. You know, it won't balance out on your budget sheet if it doesn't balance out. And so there's, I mean, you could balance it out with a wrong number. Like you could, it's been the case, I'll give an example. It's been the case on our end that we added an extra digit on one of our grants. Like we're talking, it was supposed to be a six digit grant and it was a 7-digit grant.
Ooh.
And but it matched up in the match worksheet. And of course we didn't get it because it was like, well, why would anyone ask for that amount of money for the thing we were asking for? So you just, it is very methodical though, and it's very well laid out compared to what it used to be, I will say. And maybe that's the part that made you cringe, is that it used to be, I think it used to be much worse.
No, it absolutely used to be much worse. And, you know, that's the nice thing too with going to SFS. Now we know not just what we changed to make better in the gateway, but even now we see things that we cringe at and we're like, oh, good, we can fix that with going to the next iteration. So, yeah. But you're right about the work plan before. I don't believe we let the agencies do it ahead of time. And it does make it so much easier for the grantees to let people do it ahead of time. They don't all do it, but some do. And it does make it a lot easier.
Great. 2 questions came in, and I'm going to pass these to either of you if you'd like to take them on. Thoughts on grant consultants. So I'm sitting here saying, you know, I'm a municipal employee. I wake up every day and I get paid to do what I'm doing, but not every community, certainly on this call or all over the state, has someone to do that. What's the folks' thoughts on grant consultants, and especially for smaller municipalities who don't have salaried employees to work on grants? And a second question about what organizations can apply for grants. So Susan, do you want to take either of those?
So any organization can apply for a grant. It depends on whether or not they're eligible in accordance with the solicitation. The solicitation will tell you specifically what organizations are eligible for that funding. I can tell you that typically for-profits are not eligible, but other organizations and municipalities are typically eligible. It really just depends on that specific grant opportunity. And yeah, regarding consultants, Kristen sort of alluded to it a little bit. The town or the municipality or the organization can assign anybody as a grantee to work on an application. So you theoretically, as a municipality, you could hire a consultant to do the application for you and give them the rights to do that application. And then at the end, you know, you would be the person submitting it. I can tell you that has backfired on people. A couple of our grants in the past, they've hired consultants, and the consultants actually submitted the application, and things were not great. It was information and things that the town did not want to agree to, and then they were held to it. So it could be slippery. You want to make sure that you know the person you give that authority to, you want to make sure that you have confidence in that they're going to do what is in your best interest.
Yeah, along with that, I don't really like to take a stance either way, but the one thing I would say is just maybe to make sure that they're not working on a bunch of other ones at the same time. Because I have seen before that there have been people, I think, that are working on multiple ones and not really been able to get any of them in because they're working on so many at the same time. So just maybe if you are using them, maybe question if they're doing others at the same time for the same opportunity, would be my suggestion. But
Right.
In terms of whether you're using them or not, I think it's probably an agency decision.
Right. There's another question here from Mary, and I'm going to share my screen to help to answer this one. The question is there a quick, oh, where did that just go? Hold on a second. It goes up here. Sorry. Is there a quick way to see the status of a grant in Grants Gateway? For example, what is the current stage of the grant? Are there tasks on your plate to address, and has the grant been executed? So 2 things. Again, when you're logged in, and I shared my screen, so hopefully you should be able to see this. On the top, along the top, there's the tabs here, and you can click on any of these. The portal is what Susan had in her slides, where you can browse or search. So the ones that I had showed you before were in the home page. Those are the ones that are currently available. But this browse and search is if you're looking, if you don't know, if you're like, oh, I want to know if there's something where I can electrify one of my buildings or put solar on a building or, you know, put in a bike lane or whatever. You could search for all those different words. But you can see where you are with applications. If you click on applications, you can type in a name, you can type in the status, or the trick that I learned is that you can literally just hit search and it tells you everything that you've worked on. I don't know why I didn't learn that search trick in the beginning. But anyway, these are all the applications that the city of Kingston has ever applied for. And it tells us the status, like the contract is executed, if an application was canceled for whatever reason, if the deadline passed, like we started it and then we said, you know, we don't want to do that, or we missed it, then the deadline passed. So that is where you can find out about your application status. And then in contracts, same trick, search. Love that. When the search comes up, which takes a moment.
Yeah, especially if you're searching all of them, it's going to take.
So then it tells you, the application number, the contract number, what type it is, what in this case, it's City of Kingston, when the contract was for. Period number is, for instance, we have a Zoos, Botanical Gardens and Aquaria grant, which is a grant that recurs, and every couple of years it gives us a new pot of funding. But every individual year we have a separate fund set up, and so that tells us the different period, what the period is, and then the contract status. So we have whether it's executed, if agency STS determination means it's on the agency's end, so they're figuring something out. I have no idea what STS means, and it doesn't really usually matter to me on my end. I just know that it's not in our hands. Program manager review means that I've submitted something. So for instance, you can see I submitted 3 electric vehicle grants recently. Oh no, these are ones that I'm still waiting to get into contract for a long time. Hint, hint.
Julie, can I have you show something real quick? Can you click on that one that's in program manager review? Yeah, click right on there. Yep, on that. And then see where it says period schedule report. Click on that. This will show, it'll pop up a schedule. So this will actually show you where everything is and how, oh yeah, long time it's been in program manager review. So it'll show you the scheduled days and then it'll show you the actual days. So this will show you right through on the left there, the contract development statuses. So you can see sort of the statuses that it'll go through, and that'll show you the tasks in order. So like when it says STS determination, that's something that the fiscal staff does, just it's on our side to make it get ready for signatures or after signatures. So that'll help you see where it is in the, in this schedule of things. So if you're not sure what any of those things mean, that you can look at and say, oh, that's where it is. It's almost at signature. It's almost executed. Just a helpful hint.
Great. I'm going to stop sharing. We have a couple other questions here and then we'll wrap up in just a moment. Does the Grants Gateway only cover state grants, or can you also find county grants? The Grants Gateway is just a state program. So there are many other, and this panel is just about Grants Gateway, but there are many, many, many other grant opportunities, including the consolidated funding application process through the state, which all consolidates at one time, and some of them go through Grants Gateway, but that also goes through many other different departments, and then any county grants or other things would be separate systems. This is just state grants. I am not, unless you're working with a private entity, I'm not sure of any kind of one-stop shop portal where you can find all possible grants available, private and public. There are private, you can engage with firms that help you do that process. And we have done that before, but there isn't any, to my knowledge, any publicly available one-stop shop for all possible grant funding. Another question about, can school PTAs apply? That would depend on who is eligible as an applicant, and each of the grants would tell you who is eligible, whether a school PTA would be eligible. Let's see, we're currently in a position where the grantee cannot access the grant and Grants Gateway because the grantor assigned the grant to an incorrect county department. Any suggestions on how to navigate this challenge?
Yes. You should call me.
Yep.
But I probably can't help you until Tuesday. I apologize because my day is completely, I have meetings all day long and then I'm off tomorrow and Monday's a holiday. So let me give you my number. It's 518-474-6320. I'll put it in the chat maybe if I can see.
Perfect.
518-474-6320.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to wrap up our session here. I just wanted to mention a few things. This same session with Susan and Kristen will be hosted again at 4 p.m. today. For other folks, if you know that they didn't make it or wanting to see it, or you want to see it again, I will not be the moderator. Simon Skolnick, who is the president of NYSAC, he'll be the moderator. So he'll be speaking to his municipal experience. So I encourage you to do that. This presentation will be shared and on our website after the event. The rest of the day, I encourage you to jump back into GatherTown, and to do that, you're literally just going to close out of Zoom when we're done here, and you will click back on your tab where GatherTown is, and you can navigate through the rest of the event. I want to hope that you enjoy the rest of the event, and that you do take an opportunity to look and apply for grants. If you would like to reach out to me, I would talk ad nauseum about grants. If you would be interested in talking about it, you certainly can. Again, my name is Julie Noble and I work for the city of Kingston. But I want to really thank Susan and Kristen for giving your time today, and also for John for being our tech person. We're going to close out now, and I'm going to stop the recording, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Good to meet everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.